Today we gladly sing the praise of her, whose daughters and whose sons now loyal voices proudly raise, to bless her with our benisons. Of all their mothers fairest she, most wise of all that wisest be, most true of all the true, say we, is our dear alma mater.
Even when I visited here for a few months, the first time around, I felt like I had learned more in those few months than I had learned at any time since 6th grade, maybe. And I think a lot of people feel that way when they come here. The workshops are more intense, the students are better prepared and more intense, and it just sort of feels like intellectual life isn't fast forward.
What it has that I think I've never seen anywhere else before is a commitment that whatever divides us, whether it's methodology or disciplinary background or political views, it's not going to cut us off from each other as intellectuals. We will always be in there talking to one another, and we will give respectful and helpful comments to each other across the deepest disagreements. And I do not find that in the rest of any university.
Does voting matter? Does the politician matter? When does the Supreme Court do things in a way that's other than politics? You know, do property rules make a difference? You know, who ought to get to park and where, and why is this like legal rules? I mean, these are things that in other contexts, if you talk about topics like that at a cocktail party, people will immediately joke that you must be from the University of Chicago Law School.
I remember when I was first on the teaching market, I looked at a bunch of schools, and I feared that at some schools, while the quality was very high, it was a little sleepy, a little like premature retirement. And at Chicago, there's just no sense of that.
Often I'll walk into a conversation to a classroom and think I know the answer, or that the answer is pretty clear, that everyone's going to agree with that answer. And you walk in and you realize that not only do people not agree with that answer, but they have incredibly compelling reasons for not agreeing with that answer. And more often than not, they're more compelling than mine. So I think that's just, that's really what I live for. It's just absolutely fantastic.
Once you get out, I think of the educational setting, a lot of times you're going to places where people are very similar. You know, there are a lot of people like me doing the kinds of things I do. But at the University of Chicago, I really had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people who were different. And I think that really epitomizes my experience at the school.
What Chicago did for me, and what I think it does generally, is give you a wonderful foundation, not just the knowledge itself, and it burnishes your analytical abilities so that you can build on that foundation, continue to learn and grow as a person and as a lawyer.
And I came to the bench feeling prepared more than anything else by the fact that I'd been at Chicago. I was deeply Chicagoized.
The law school is famous for interdisciplinary study and work. And by that we mean that you don't come here and just learn legal rules or even the theory behind legal rules, but you understand those rules by incorporating the insights of other disciplines.
If you want to teach lawyers, just how to practice law for the next year, you can get by okay by just teaching them the law. But if you want to help students handle problems in the private sector or in government for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, you really do much better by them if you give them a sense of how other fields work and how law might be improved by reference to other fields.
Being part of a bigger university and a diverse faculty is hugely helpful for me in thinking through the issues that I focus on. Some of the best help I get when I'm thinking through issues is from colleagues who are not focused on my interests at all, but who come from outside and can think and help me think very rigorously.
I think it's been one of the most successful exports of the city of Chicago, not to mention this law school. If you go to other law schools now, they want to be like us in this and in other respects, and they too pride themselves on interdisciplinary work.
the Reagan administration and the Clinton administration and Vice President Gore and now President Bush, all of these administrations are really influenced by economic analysis of law at Chicago across political divisions.
So this idea that the very stuff of law is also the stuff of building a great society and thinking about what one wants to happen in the political and cultural arena is something that I associate with every Chicago lawyer.
My father was a doctor. He wanted me to be a doctor in the worst possible way. And I remember when the moment of crisis finally came in his life. Long after I decided I was going to law school, I was sitting at home and I was having my usual difficulties with my knife and fork at the dinner table. And my mother looks at my father and she says, "Bern, dear, your son Richard doesn't know how to hold a knife and fork. What makes you think he'll be a great surgeon?"
Person for person, this is and has for a very long time been the strongest faculty of any law school in the United States. But it's clearly a faculty for a type of person. This is an institution, both the law school and the university, in which you are essentially only as good as your last argument. And there's a need to constantly test and prove and participate that is a great joy for those of us who love that and very taxing for those who do not. It's a place where the whole is certainly greater than the sum of the parts, where we make each other better.
They stand in front of a classroom which could have as few as 30 people or as many as 150, and they can be entrancing. I had professors who interested me in subjects I never would have been interested in otherwise. Professors who made subjects I found unbelievably boring into the most interesting thing on the planet. They are a wonderful, wonderful faculty, and I am so lucky to have been taught by them.
Well, the topics that I'm working on, some old, some new. I'm writing a lot of paper on intellectual property, the Human Genome Project, issues having to do with the Copyright Term Extension Act, animal rights, property rights having to do with Lake Tahoe, the history of the early forms of action in tort law, a paper on standing in the Constitution, a book on the subject of skepticism and freedom, and another book on freedom of association, a bunch of newspaper columns for the National Review, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and the National Law Journal.
When our students come here, our faculty compete to teach those students. People come here and they have Cass Sunstein and Richard Epstein and David Strauss and David Curry. They have those people 2, 3, even 4 times before they graduate.
There's only one way in which you could act as if you like students, and that's to like students. And if you don't like students, it's going to come across in all sorts of ways. And what I try to do when I teach is to be formidable on the one hand and accessible on the other. I don't feel that it's a great source of comfort to me if the students leave my class saying, "Gee, we really understood what old Professor Epstein was saying today." I want them to be a little bit on edge. I want them to think that there's some things that I said that were wrong, that other things that were puzzling, other things that were downright perverse, and some things that were provocative, and they hadn't quite been able to put it together. So that the trick of being a teacher in terms of the classroom is to try to keep students intellectually off balance. Because if you just spoon feed them everything that they need to know, quote unquote, they won't even realize why it is they need to know it. A simple distinction that you just iterate to a student is something to say, not too hard to understand. But if you go down 10 kids and everyone manages to miss it until somebody in desperation figures out what's going on, then they realize that there's a lot more to this game than it appears.
When a professor seems to be being not so nice in class because they're trying to draw a particular kind of idea out of somebody, it doesn't seem bothering or threatening to me because I know that they have my best educational interests in mind. So I think that really everybody, really, except for one professor, whose name I won't say on this thing, I think really everybody has our best educational interest in mind.
I was here in a class with Professor Kirk, and he would always say, "Well, does anyone want to fight?" I'm like, what does he mean, does anyone want to fight? But then as he went through his thought process and people would question him and he'd shoot back a retort, I'm like, wow, he's really killing them. And it's kind of that way on the football field where, if you're a good player, you challenge other people to test you physically. And in the same way he's challenging people to test him mentally, that is the charge that I got out of that. I mean, just having someone say, hey, challenge me and come after me give me your best shot.
The faculty at the University of Chicago made it a point to be accessible to the students, both physically in that their offices are in the library where we were. They have an open door policy so you can go in and talk to them whenever they were there. That wasn't something I'd experienced anywhere before, and certainly not from faculty members of that level.
The nice thing about having professors' offices in the library is that they can't get away from you. It's nice to see professors working in the same spaces that we're working in. They pass us in the hallways, they are using the same books, and it's a way to really start a conversation with a professor if you see him or her every day.
I had a question on a tax matter. I was working on it for a client in the clinic, and I went and asked Professor Eisenberg, just stopped in his office one day, and we sat down and talked about it for half an hour. And that's just, that access to a world-renowned tax expert is just unheard of.
One of the gifts I gave myself, having freed myself from administration, was to try to do something totally different. And so I've been taking banjo lessons at the Old Town School of Folk Music. Can you cut and edit?
My first year, he composed some classical pieces to people that have traveled all throughout the world, with people who have done Peace Corps activities. And I think just being able to be in that environment and have such a wide range of discussions and meet with people that have such a wide range of interests is really fascinating to me.
They have such diverse and exciting backgrounds. One of the things that's easy to forget when you see the students only in a classroom is that these are people who have many opportunities and experiences in life that are extraordinarily rich. And many of the students have musical and political experiences, travel experiences, and being able to spend time with them outside of class just is a very enriching and exciting experience.
Students, in terms of fun, sometimes they play Frisbee. I see them in the back playing Frisbee or softball or throwing a football around, and sometimes they're really good at it. But I do notice their conversations while they're throwing the football around, and it's often, about some constitutional law problem or some torts issue where maybe the professor got it wrong. So these are distinctly Chicago Frisbee and football games.
One of my best experiences was participating in the Law School Musical, actually, which is a skit comedy show that we do every year. It's student written and student directed and student acted. And it's just a great chance to sort of have fun with your friends, sort of poke fun at the faculty.
For fun, we tend to, faculty tends to read law review articles, and I think the students for fun tend to read law review articles with music on.
There is no other clinical program where the students in the program take on as difficult a set of tasks as they do here. I had a student who had a very difficult case, which we lost at trial. She was responsible for writing the briefs and doing the oral argument in the Illinois Appellate Court, where we lost again. And she came to me a few weeks after that, and we really had no effective other mechanism to use in terms of litigating further. And she said to me, well, I'm very unhappy. What should we do next? And I said, well, that's the right question. You come back to tell me what we should do next. And a week later, she come back, she said, well, we have to change the law. We have to go to the legislature and change the law. I said, that's a good answer. Write a statute. And she did. That statute that she wrote was enacted by the Illinois legislature.
I
think there's a network of our students because wherever they are more thoughtful, more critical than other lawyers, and they participate in this world of the law firm in a different way, more as leaders and thinkers, not just following the tradition.
We try to get as many from the USC as we can, but it's tough because there's only maybe 175 of them in every major law firm in the country, in addition to judges and academic institutions. They're all trying for this same group of people.
I asked my husband, who is not a U of C alum, the same question. He's a lawyer. And I asked him, what makes a University of Chicago student different from another top school? And he answered it actually much better than I could. And he said, there is a uniform level of intelligence that you will always get from a U of C student.
When people who are hiring see University of Chicago Law School on a resume, they assume that the student has a level of skill and ability to think like a lawyer that for many law schools, even very high-level prestigious law schools, they assume they're going to have to do some of this preparatory work. Just seeing the Chicago degree suggests a kind of level of rigor and training that they can count on.
I have always had at least one and sometimes two law clerks from the University of Chicago. I have loved my Chicago law clerks. I have to restrain myself from hiring only Chicago people.
No one wants or needs a University of Chicago law school trained lawyer if the facts are known and the law is known and the application of the facts to the law is known. What one needs a University of Chicago trained lawyer for is when the facts are uncertain, when the law is uncertain, and when you need someone to help deal with a context in which there is a great deal of uncertainty and flux, and to sort one's way through that.
It will never be a place that invests vast sums in building fancy physical facilities. It'll be a place that's about its human capital. And I think that's the thing that we should take the most pride in the last 100 years and hopefully the next.